personal finance. So to join us on the show is Dr. Linda Papadopolous, psychologist, and Karren Barrett, the founder and CEO of Unbiased. Welcome to the show. Great to have you on board. Can you tell us a bit more about what the research suggests, please?
So Unbiased is launching its Make Money Ages campaign, and we undertook some research with UCL looking at how generations are written about in the media. And really this was done with the premise that the media is a mirror for how we speak in society. And the findings are really, really interesting. Just to take you through some of the headlines, over half of the articles portrayed baby boomers negatively, and some of the labelling was quite vicious in terms of calling them selfish, stingy and greedy. And then moving on to millennials, the research found they are framed as victims, with articles describing them as hapless and disadvantaged, and find it difficult to really get anything done. And then the third thing was, despite making up approximately 20% of the UK population, only 5% of articles mentioned Gen X, which is sort of my generation, 40s, 50s, and we're typically seen as the sandwich generation with sort of older parents and kids still at home, and very much in the midst of sort of having to plan finances for our lives and those of our loved ones. So really interesting research, and I think the takeaway was that hostility is rife between generations, with all the articles comparing boomers to the other groups and being really antagonistic about it.
No, that's really interesting. You mentioned that, and I think that's for sure. I think a lot of our listeners that will resonate in terms of the media. What's your take on it, Dr. Linda, from a psychological perspective? What's your take on sort of the media and the use of this sort of language and the impact that has around, like,
Look, I think that for me, the main takeaway out of all, the unbiased research findings is it's just really unhelpful to split into haves and have-nots, villains and victims. It's, it's a kind of really unhelpful stereotyping. And the problem with stereotyping, as we know, is twofold. Number one, it can lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, if I believe something about myself, I sort of, in this case, I'm a victim, nothing's going to go right, I'm going to have a lot more inertia. I'm not going to be able to kind of act on that in the same way that if I felt that there was a way to fix something. And then the second thing, of course, is that with this stereotyping, we begin to relate to each other as members of a group rather than individuals. And, as Karren mentioned, there's a lot of this idea of, I think it's inadvertent, but this sort of pitting people against each other. Oh, well, this generation, they tend to be, stingy and selfish, and that has an effect on this generation that, are much more helpless and disadvantaged. And this doesn't allow for like a healthy understanding of our power of our situation, and it certainly doesn't allow for that sense of control that we need to feel to take action. And I think the main message for me as a psychologist is that the solution is that people, reading this data need to take control by, number one, ignoring stereotypes, number two, changing the language that they use about themselves and others, and number three, taking that first step to realize a better future.
Yeah, no, that sort of makes sense to me, and the thing is really, I mean, it's sort of, that makes logical sense, but from a practicality, going forward, I mean, sort of my perspective on this, and I could be completely wrong, it comes from the sort of top to bottom, really. It's like, I think the difficult thing around this is it's like people read, and the media is at least at mainstream level, really influential on people's sort of thoughts, and now people get up in the morning, they check their social media. I mean, the reality is that, is it possible to sort of end or sort of make an impact around like this area, so the ageism in personal finance? Sort of, do you see it as possible? Can we sort of break down those barriers? You've mentioned some sort of things that people can do. Is there anything else they can do? Is there anything else anyone listening can do going forward?
Well, I'll tell you from a psychological point of view, and then I'll hand over to Karren to tell you from a financial. But from a psychological point of view, for me, for anyone listening, the underside of anxiety is always avoidance. And we know that, when it comes to financial matters and mental health, avoidance tends to be the go-to. We know that people aren't great at planning for the future. We know that because it causes anxiety and they find a lot of these things kind of mumbo-jumbo, they don't take action, they don't kind of read, the small print or even the big print. Sometimes they kind of avoid opening things up. So for me, I want, the main message today to kind of take that first step, right? And, in the same way that if you had health issues, you'd speak to a qualified professional, it's no difference for finance. Speak to someone, find out the situation that you're in, and then start taking sort of like step-by-step advice. Karren, would you say that as well?
Absolutely. There's no better time to start, making a difference to your future financial self than now. We've dealt with hundreds of thousands of people who have come to the website. We've got lots of information there around what type of questions you need to ask your potential advisor, how to make yourself feel comfortable, what is the cost, if any, and will you get value from that? And really, these are big life decisions that advisors help with. You don't retire every day. You don't move house and take out a new mortgage every day. So these things can be a bit scary. And, by being proactive and getting an expert, trusted advisor to hold your hand through these decisions, you're just going to be more likely to get an outcome that you're happy with. And I think what we also found in the research was that the vast majority of financial articles were very, very general, and actually the recommendations were very shallow. Things like stick to your budget, stick to a shopping list, have an emergency fund. And actually what we see is people's financial needs are much more complex. They want to do certain things. Maybe it's planning care fees for their parents. Maybe it's something around their children's education, or trying to ensure that should they die, their spouses and able to keep a roof over their heads. These are really big decisions that impact lots of people's lives in your family. So it really does pay to get someone on your side who's an expert around these financial decisions, just to put you in a better place.
Absolutely, and I suppose it's probably exacerbated the world we live in these days. Obviously, around the globe, things are tough financially for a lot of people as well. So I think you mentioned before as well, Dr. Linda, around that sort of avoidance, and I think probably a lot of people can sort of relate to that, where it's kind of like things aren't, disposable income for a lot of people isn't what it used to be for one reason or the other, and it's probably another story for another day. But in terms of like looking at the research, and you've mentioned there, Karren, some of the sort of questions they can look at, can you signpost our listeners where they can go and have a look for themselves?
Absolutely. They can visit makemoneyageless.com and find out what the media says about you relative to your age. And probably more helpfully, you can sign up to look at all the information in the report, which we'll have finalised shortly. And you can also fill in a few details about yourself, and within as quick as 60 seconds, you can be matched to an advisor. I would encourage anyone to have a quick chat with them and see if there's help that can be provided from this financial advisor to put you in a really great spot for your future self.
Brilliant. No, thanks for that, and thanks for your time, and it sounds really interesting and informative, that's for sure, and want to thank you for joining us. Have a great day and a great week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Jimmy.